they were just better than Ireland in every department for most of rugby history, and now for 2 decades it must be so unpalatable to them to be on the bad side of this rivalry, to be routinely beaten by this Irish team and find themselves so far off the pace, and to not have success. I mean, they've become more relevant in recent years, but there was a good chunk of the last 2 decades where they really weren't. They were a little bit above Italy, vulnerable to being beaten by them. So it's kind of good to have them at the table to some degree, and to be fighting for it, and to kind of to go to Murrayfield and actually have a little bit of fear about going over there. Not that it's ever been easy, but I think this is a fixture that stands on its own merits this weekend. I mean, the fact that it's on the Sunday belies its importance to the weekend. I think it kind of completes a set off, and the Sunday game is in Rome and it's an afterthought, but this is going to be good.
Yeah, it sure is. So, Fiona, this Scottish team generally being talked about as the best of the Six Nations era. How good are they?
Yeah, they're a joy to watch. I think, Joe, at the minute, I'm really enjoying watching them. I know they obviously had that loss over in France, but just, I suppose, we know what type of magic Finn Russell can bring, but when he brings that magic, he really is unbelievable. I mean, he's got the most carries so far in the tournament. I think he's up around 45, 6 offloads. He's assisted in 4 tries. So he's just a really good player on his day, and I think that's where Ireland would need to target. But other than that, a kind of attacking style of rugby, I'm very, very impressed with the pack, their cohesion. Richie Gray, 17, like he's 17 lineouts. He's involved in a lot of stuff. He's getting his hands on the ball, the front rows. Fagerson is another player who's really impressed me. All in all, I'm really, I've said it last week as well, Joe, but George Turner, I mean, he's just so good. He's, I suppose, I think he's at 100% or 97%. Maybe he's lost one line out in the whole competition in the 3 games so far. So they just have really good players all around the park. But what's impressing me is their cohesion together. We've talked about their inconsistency in the past. It seems to be clicking when Finn Russell is kicking and clicking. Everything is going well.
Their centre partnership's been talked about as good as anything as well. They produced in a very long time. Stuart Hogg seems to have responded very well to losing the captaincy. Van der Merwe, I think, has won everybody over now, post lines in particular. The thought of him running at Mac Hansen is an interesting one. So, again, everybody's in agreement. They're in a very good place. We'll find out Sunday perhaps how good. Yeah,
they're still not as good as Ireland. I mean, they're very good. It's the first against the 5th in the world, and I think they're on an upward trajectory. But I do think I don't think they're at the same level that Ireland, France, at their best. Maybe not France right now, but obviously France were able to see them off in Paris. They have very, very good players, but I don't know how many of them will get into this Irish team at the same time. So, at the risk of being part of the arrogant Irish media that has been widely discussed this week, I think Ireland, if they get everything right on Saturday, will still have enough for them. But that's not to say they're not a clear and present danger to Ireland's Grand Slam and World Cup ambitions. They're a really dangerous opponent, and that's what makes it very, very interesting. They have a lovely style, but it needs to be on the back of go forward ball. And I think that's where Ireland. We asked Andy Farrell after the Italy game about Finn Russell, and he said, well, yeah, Andy Farrell is not prone to talking at length about opposition players in the way his predecessor is. He largely focuses on his own team, and he said, yeah, everyone's good when they get quick ball, we just have to stop it. And that's, I think, been the template for Ireland over the last decade against Scotland. They've only lost twice since 2013 to the Scots, and they largely try and beat them up. And I think that's going to be the way they're going to go about it. And it's getting harder to do because they've been very strategic in the way they've gone out and broadened their brace of players. They've brought in players from South Africa, from Australia. They've brought in loads of English players with Scottish heritage. They've been very if you've gone to Ireland and brought in Ben Healy and potentially could go get John Cooney. They've got a former Wallaby, a former England international in their squad. They have been really, really strategic in how they try and broaden the base of players, but they're still only operating off 2 teams, both of whom are middling URC teams and would routinely be beaten by the provinces. So while I think there's a lot to build up there, I think we can build them up too much in the advance of a game, and I think Ireland will go as number 1 team in the world and will still expect to beat them at the same time.
That answer Farrell gives on Russell, it's very succinct. Is your sense that he's hoovering up every stat and every piece of detail and distilling it into a simple message, Or do you think he's not paying so much attention to the endless stream of information he could, and it's just going, instinct is the wrong word because it's far more informed than instinct, but just going off his own eye?
I wouldn't diminish his rugby knowledge or his appetite for information. I don't think he puts as much faith in the stats as some other coaches do. I think he's more of a feel. He trusts his feel a lot more. I think it was Stuart, or sorry, I don't know if you listened to the BBC podcast about him on Monday, which I thought was very interesting. No. But they had Chris Ashton and Stuart Lancaster on talking about him. Ashton was a young player coming through at Wigan when he was a senior player, and then he also played for him at Saracens, or I think he convinced him to come to Saracens before leaving. And Lancaster also spoke a lot about him, and what came across is just his rugby knowledge, his intellect, and his feel, having been a professional from 16 and a top level player straight into coaching, his understanding of the game, his feel for the game. Like, I think he respects statistics without being a slave to the statistics, and I think he has certainly put far more of a focus in his public discussions into bigging up his own team rather than expending a lot of energy and airtime on another team. So in the build-up to the France game, he was asked about France and he just gave a one-line answer, and it was like, basically asked me about Ireland. He doesn't, whereas Joe was the opposite. Joe didn't want to talk about his own team. He would happily list off every French player he could in a perfect French accent, and that was his one way of talking down the clock, but also of trying to deflect from the strengths of his own team. So they're just got different styles and different approaches. And he also, I think he's a good... there's a word that I've completely forgotten, but he trusts his assistants. Delegator. He's a good delegator. I think his assistants are on the details. His team leaders are on the details. They are very well prepared. They're very accurate. They're very aware of their opponent's strengths and weakness. They do an awful lot of time on their analysis. So I think you can talk down his kind of reliance on statistics and sound like he's not as detailed a coach as others, but I think the way they couldn't be as good as they are without being so well prepared. So it's a different style. But I think it comes off very well with this group of Irish players who probably were very used to the micro detail of Joe Schmidt in the past. So it's working at the moment. Obviously, these things all have can stop working at some stage, and they might come a cropper this week. But yeah, he'll give respect to the opposition. He'll prepare for the opposition, but he certainly doesn't want to go out there and give them as more airtime than he feels they deserve.
Fiona, Murrayfield is going to be hopping for obvious reasons. Big game for Scotland, Triple Crown on the line, and even potentially, if it goes very well, they can be in the conversation for the championship come round 5, and it's the world number 1 team coming to 10 as well. So it's going to be an amazing occasion. Atmosphere will be electric. You would think Scotland will bring huge physicality. Beyond that, where will they go after Ireland? Where would you anticipate they'll try and stymie the Irish attack, and what will they do in attack?
I think it's the same old thing that teams are trying to do to Leinster, Joe. I mean, Ireland are 3.1 seconds ruck speed. We know what Ireland are like with quick ball. I think Scotland are very similar. So I do think that they will go after that ruck and try and slow it down. They'll probably look at last week, Joe, as well, and have a look. Now, I would imagine Ireland have had 2 weeks to fix up those kind of defensive issues in the first half. Especially missed tackles. I think Scotland are the highest tackle success in the tournament, so they seem to have got their line integrity and their connections right, so they'll be looking at really going after Ireland, I would imagine, out wide with their big ball carriers. So it's an area to counteract Ireland. I think they'll be trying to slow down that ruck. But I think Ireland Scotland are very similar to Ireland, the coaching setup in Townsend. I think they will be also concentrating on their own game, Joe. They'll obviously try and do that around that ruck area. They'll be looking at some of the trick plays Ireland have done, the back and sides, so they'll be trying to keep that internal defence connected. But it's definitely Scotland themselves, I think, will be going to attack those wide channels, and I think Mac Hansen in particular may be low. And I suppose if you look at scrum time, they'll be going after probably the front row as well, because I think their scrum unit has been very solid. Porter is someone they'll be trying to wind up, I'd imagine. I think he's on 7 penalties so far in the tournament, so they'll have little areas, but I think they'll be focusing on their own game, but definitely attacking outside in those wide channels.
Okay. There you go. That was a taster of Rory O'Connor and Fiona Hayes on Wednesday Night Rugby. The full conversation waiting for you on podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. It's waiting for you there. You can also download the app OTB Sports in your app store.